Welcome to another exciting episode of Unzip, Reboot and Leave URL podcast. Today we have someone who is currently chair in Aged Care Council of Elders, currently vice president and chair Policy Council of Aging, Kota, South Australia. She was governing board member in Northern Adelaide Local Health Network, NALAN, and she was chair the Aged Care, the Aged Right Advocacy Services in South Australia. Please welcome Anne Burgess, AM. How are you, Anne?
I'm very well, and it's lovely to talk to you, Gutam.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your time, Anne. Okay, so straight to the first question. Uh, I am delighted to say to my audience that you are growing younger in 80s, okay? And 6 decades you are working, okay, in social justice community engagement. And you are the first lady who kind of developed a community-based mental health service in what, 50 years ago?
Yes,
70s,
yes, in South
70s?
Australia, first in South Australia. Yeah.
Wow. So, how have you seen these areas evolve over the past decades?
So, as you're saying, I've been around a long time. So, 60 years ago, I started as a student social worker in mental health, when there were two big psychiatric institutions in South Australia, and nothing that was community based. And then I moved into human rights and equal opportunity. So involved in complaints from people on the basis of their race and their sex and their gender and so on. And now, appropriately for my age, I'm working a lot in the aging sector where older people feel completely invisible. You get to a certain age and people tell you nobody cares, nobody listens, nobody wants to know, and you feel like you've lost your persona. So I've had a long history of working in areas where people feel stigmatized, discriminated against, that there's a bias against them in some way. And in all of those areas, I think even 60 years ago, I was working so hard to try and listen to people who were in those situations, and to try and understand what it is that would help them. And I can say, I think from the vast age that I'm at now, that some of that bias and some of that discrimination has certainly lessened in some areas. And I think about sexual harassment, we all know about that now. Racism comes and goes, and it's really rearing its head again at the moment. Um, and I think for people with mental illness, there's certainly a lot more, you hear more of the voices of people who have had mental health issues being confident enough to speak out. So I think there has been improvement. But there's a sort of underlying fear in the community all the time about people who are different from them. That difference just surfaces, and it's really hard, I think, to get people to walk in the shoes of somebody in those situations.
Wow. Okay. Okay. So, in policy making and in future of care system, uh, definitely there is a lot of shift happened. Like, how is the inclusion of lived experience individuals progressing, or what more can be done to amplify their voices and bring that empathy into the care?
I think this is in mental health particularly, but in all areas as well, that I've worked in. I think this has produced the biggest shift And when I look back and see 60 year now I think, gosh, it took a long time and it's still evolving. Um, but I think um, what systems tend to do is they tend to look at a problem and say, so how do we put an efficient system to respond to that problem? So there comes a service. And it's like, here's your service and you need to use it. And I think what we've discovered over the years is that people vote with their feet. Um, if it's not a service that meets their needs, they won't use it, or they won't use it correctly, or they won't use it to get the outcome that the system thought it should be designed for. So in the late 90s, I was fortunate enough to be Director of Mental Health in South Australia, where I had to give speeches every week, sometimes every day, about mental health. And I was on the speaking circuit, and I had a group of fabulous people who had mental health backgrounds, who were carers, or people with lived experience of mental health. And I used to take them with me and get them to tell a bit of their story if they were prepared to the groups of people. And I could see how influential that was in people understanding, really from a personal point of view, what people had gone through and what they needed now and so on. Now, it just seems incredible to me now. That was absolutely revolutionary. And when I suggested that a person with a mental illness should be on the panel when they were selecting nurses, I mean, that was a step too far for probably 10 years. That, how could they have anything to offer? And in a way, the subtle message was we're not going to have those people on our panel. And so I think, so that was the late 90s designed in mental health without at least a cursory inclusion of people with that lived experience having some commentary on it. And I think that those people would say now and have said to me, sometimes it's about consultation in quote marks, which means we're going to tell you what we're going to do. Um, and it would be nice if you nodded your head and said yes. Um, and aren't you lucky that we've given you the opportunity to do that? So there's still a bit of that token inclusion. But where I see it being done well, it's people with lived experience from the get-go involved in designing something that they believe will meet the needs and their needs and the needs of others, and where the outcomes will be useful. So I think it's really slow. I see it now because I chair the Council of Elders, which is a fabulous group of people from around Australia who've got the same, lived experience of being old like I have, and being involved in providing commentary to the minister and the department right up front about services. So I do see it. It's slow. And when funding is tight, I would say it's probably the first thing that goes. There's still a raging debate, which there shouldn't be, about whether people should get paid for that advice. I mean, think what we pay nurses and psychiatrists and psychologists and all those people for their advice. Think what we pay, but people with lived experience is a debate about whether we pay for their time.
mm,
So it's still marginal, but I think it's changing.
mm. Okay. Now, these vulnerable populations, vulnerable, the word I use because they are not typically local, so all
Yeah,
sort of different nuances in their head, in their activity, in their culture, such as like First Nations or immigrant communities from collective societies, especially like Southeast Asians and all.
yeah,
Often, the unique barrier is our help-seeking um, nature is not there. Okay,
yeah,
so how do these cultural nuances, or in some cases spirituality, okay, that maybe
yeah,
not God but something else, some higher power,
yeah,
integrate into the care system for better serve to their needs?
yeah, yeah. And so, I mean, this when we talk about vulnerable populations, I know you would be aware, Guten, as well, that there's on the one hand, there's a concern always for me about generalizing, even if you're South Indian, I'm sure that you're not all the same and needing the same things. Um, and that happens with older people. It happens with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people all the time. So I do think we need to bear that in mind on the one hand. On the other hand, what I've heard all my life is that it goes back to the walking in the shoes, doesn't it? Like we need to stand in the shoes to talk to people in those populations to say, what is it that you want? Now, as you say, a lot of those communities are not help seeking, but where do they go? There are people in their community, whether it's an elder, whether it's a pastor, whether it's a leader in their particular community. They're the ones that they go to. And so why don't we, we need to be using their ways of help seeking to see how we can embellish that rather than say, well, here's our way, and what you need to do is adapt to that. So, in the aging sector, with immigrant communities, and certainly with First Nation communities, what works best for people is to be surrounded by that culture. When people get older, they often, although I hate generalizing, they often go back to their first language or their community roots. That's what they remember and want to live with. Um, and so, I mean, we can't say to people from remote First Nations communities, you can't die on land. It's too expensive for you to die on land. So you need to die in our hospital in the metropolitan area because we can provide the best care for you there. I mean, in their minds, this is not the best care.
Exactly.
And they don't understand what's happening around them. And it's extremely distressing for all of their family members. We do that to people in those vulnerable communities all the time. So we say, this is the service. How can we get you to come and use the service? Instead of saying, this is the skill that we've got. How can we bring that skill into your community? Whatever that skill is, how can we bring it to you in a way that works for you? Um,
Mm,
and I think that um, where we see that working the best is where you see all those elements of that particular culture or spirituality or whatever it is surrounding a person. And so, their needs are met in the way that suits them.
mm, mm, mm.
I don't
I,
know whether I answered your question, did
no,
I?
no, that's fine. I mean, uh, like from culturally coming from a different background and especially collective from collective societies, one thing I realized is if we find someone within our ecosystem or
Yeah.
surrounding, they're going through the same pain. Okay,
Yes.
then that cultural barrier kind of going down.
Yeah.
So if I then like if we talk about bully and surface level thing, it's one level. But in some cases, I have realized someone lost their children, someone lost their parents in one go in accident. So
Yeah.
like big
Yeah.
events when happen and someone is saying, "Okay, I gone through. Please sit down with me and listen."
Yeah.
Oh, people find a lot of peace and a lot of heal in that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so in a lot of those communities, well, in a lot of our communities, there are people who have been through significant trauma, lots and lots of trauma. And we would have no idea about the impact of that trauma on that individual. So
And especially on that, how they behave or
abs-
manifesting that their behavior in the outer world.
Absolutely. So I've heard, because I said I'm working a lot in the aging sector now, um, people with dementia, for example, who are behaving in a way that is threatening to them and to people around them. Often, when you unpick their story of what's happened to them, it might be that they were separated from their parents or their parents died or whatever, and they were in a situation where they felt they were hemmed in, unable to get out, and then they find themselves at the end of their life in an environment which is absolutely hems them in,
Mm.
and just creates that trauma all over again. And I've heard from Aboriginal people who have said, I could just never go into an institution like a nursing home, because that would feel to me like I've been taken away from my community all over again. So there's there's a lot of literature around at the moment with people trying to be trauma informed. So trying to understand how you get to the bottom of somebody's trauma through talking and listening and finding out what are the trigger points for them? What are
Yeah.
the things that help them to overcome that feeling of trauma? And how can we work with them to achieve that outcome?
Mm, mm. Okay. My special question, because you are actually working closely in that group, which is the older population, loneliness and despair are being significant concerns now. Okay. Things are happening, but how entrepreneurs or communities can do more to address that issues. And despair of death, which is also increasing like crazy.
Yeah, like worry about death, worry about getting dementia, and so losing their ability to control themselves and what happens in their lives is a huge worry. I really worry about loneliness, because people in the area that I'm working in now, which is all of the aged care reforms, people have said loudly and clearly since the Aged Care Royal Commission that they don't want to go into a nursing home. Residential facilities, they're called these days, but I'll call them nursing homes. So they don't want to do that. They want to stay in their own home as long as they can. So that's fine. That's their wish. And so the government has responded by setting up more legislation and more services that will come to people at home. So you can, get meals, you can get your house cleaned, you can get somebody to sit with you, all that sort of thing. Firstly, you have to have a home to get support at home. There are lots of people that don't have a home.
True.
But in terms of loneliness, I worry that that means that everything will be provided to a person in their home, that may provide them with a lot of comfort. But the people coming in are all paid workers to come in and do
True.
that and do their bit of work and then leave. They're not there because they're a good friend or they're making a relationship with you, and it's a two-way relationship that engages you and makes you feel that you're cared about necessarily. So I worry about that. When I talk to older people these days about that, they want to make sure that they're connected in their community. So they know the people in the street, they know their doctor is close by, they can get to the supermarket if they can't drive, the pharmacy will deliver to them. It's that sense of community connectedness that I think is the thing we should be working the hardest at. And when you think about it, Gujam, that is no different than mental health, is it? So a person with mental health issues wants to feel like they've got people around them who care about them. They've got a secure roof over their head. They've got something purposeful to do through the day and someone to connect with who cares about them. It's no different, really.
Mm.
It's just we're dealing with it at a different end of the aging spectrum, often, than we are in mental health. So I think it's a universal need to feel you have a purpose in life. You have something. You have good, strong connections with people. You have a bit of fun. It's not all
Mm.
serious life.
Mm.
There's a those connections bring you joy. So I think we're talking about something universal across every age in the population.
Mm. And for a first generation immigrant, a lot of our parents are still in our own countries. And what
Yeah,
I always, debate, I mean, people definitely, whatever decision they take, it's their own. But I find in their own country, whatever the condition of it, in their own house, life is more therapeutic. If we bring them here, okay, they are with their kids, but the surrounding, the ecosystem, it's absolutely like a third party for them,
foreign.
foreign.
Yeah,
So they
yeah,
don't find that warmth, that connection, that thing. And after a while, they
yeah,
start feeling,
yeah,
even worse. I mean, within their family, but feeling more lonely. That's even
yeah,
worse.
yeah. And we do the same thing with people, with a mental illness. We pluck them out of their community, take them to hospital, provide, maybe useful treatment, maybe, and then we put them back in that same environment and say, now you're better.
Mm,
And so like this is something we've known for more than my 60 years in mental health, is that people with mental illness, they need a house, they need a home, they need people who care about them. I should say, we need people we need something useful to do through the day, some purpose in life.
mm,
All of those things. And if we're in a foreign community that doesn't speak our language, that doesn't have our history, the connections, understanding of how we grew up and lived, and it's 10 times harder. So when I first started in mental health as a social worker, there it was in the where am I, like late 60s or something like that, and there were a whole lot of people, Italians, who fled Europe and came, and some came to South Australia, and they were often people who had worked hard their whole life, physically hard, and worked hard enough to raise enough money to come and move their whole family to a different country, but came here and found they couldn't get a job, and they felt totally alienated. And Australia was certainly not good at welcoming immigrants in those days. Maybe still isn't in some areas, but was very much worse. So looking around their community, no one like them. The only thing that helped them survive was being amongst that little community that they
Mm,
could develop of people who were like them with the same histories and whatever. But then if they got a mental illness, there was a stigma about that. And so they're alienated from that group. And it was so hard to help them.
mm,
So hard
mm, mm,
because it all just felt totally foreign for them.
mm, mm, mm,
So I think, the same principles of what we needed um, to address then, so we could bring them into hospital and maybe treat them for depression and work through with them some of that. But then they'd go back to that same environment where people were really biased against their history, biased, not welcoming. They looked different from other people. It was a really difficult time for them. So thank goodness we're more multicultural these days than we were.
mm.
But people still find it hard.
Yes. Okay. Now, technology and innovation have a growing role in the psychological well-being. Okay, and you always like talk about that. So, how you envision down the line it has more impact or more usage in everyday life for from children to old people?
So when I think about that, I think for me, what I think is what we want to be able to provide for people is help where they need it, when they need it, in the way that they need it. And so that technology has the advantage that it can be on the spot when someone needs it. It can link people to the information or advice or help behind the scenes so they get that when they need it. Um, it has that great advantage over having to go on a waiting list and be in the area that you need it, close by enough or whatever. I mean, what we've always said with mental health interventions, they need to be, close to home. They need to be part of people's environment so they can drop in, they can be seen, they can, when they feel they need that advice. So I think that's where technology and AI, although I don't know a lot about this at all, I just look at it as broad, and I think it has the opportunity to be where people need it, when they need it, as they need it. Um, and we've all learnt from COVID, I think, that we can do that like you and I are doing today, face to face. So it doesn't have to be that, like press three buttons and get to number three, and that's where somebody will tell you what you need to do next. Press button four. Uh,
Mm,
like all of that can happen behind the scenes, and you can still actually provide a face to face somewhere. as well. And whether you're a person with mental illness or you're an older person or you've been sexually harassed, what all those people tell me is they want to look at someone in the eyes and talk to somebody face to face. And we know that if it's somebody who's been through a similar situation, that works so much better
mm, mm,
because immediately you can make the link of
mm,
how that person is feeling, what they're wanting, and be able to share. This is an experience that I had, and this is, I understand what you're going through. And when you think about it, there are services like Lifeline that have been going probably as long as I'm old. Um, and what they've done from the beginning is to involve people who have been through feeling suicidal or, having those sort of stresses and understanding what it's about. It's just been, we're really slow and we're still really slow to value that lived experience.
mm,
And I hope you're going to let me talk about Safe Haven a bit in a minute. But Safe Haven, they're taking that lived experience, putting peer workers at the front door is the most valuable bit of that service.
So yeah, please little explain that the safe haven because my audience are in other countries also, and I keep on talking about this to them, and they have no bloody idea. So please little explain.
So Safe Haven is a service that grew out of the Northern Mental Health Alliance discussions. So the Alliance is set up in South Australia in a particular geographic area, which is an area of huge disadvantage, one of the most disadvantaged areas in Australia. And what we did was bring together all of the services, the government and non-government, particularly non-government services in that area who were dealing with people with mental health issues, which is almost every service really when you think about it, and a group of people with lived experience as well. And we meet every couple of months together and we work through what's working, what's not working, where are the gaps, what do we need, how do we get lived experience into all our services, those sorts of things. And out of those discussions, people said what we need is just a local service in our area that people who live in that area can drop in when things are going bad for them. Like we know people are waiting too long
Mm,
and don't want to go and use the services and then end up in a really bad way in the emergency department of hospitals, which is not the right place for anyone in those circumstances. Um, and they're either sent home or they're admitted to hospital and often in a far worse state than if we'd been able to get to them early. So none of this is rocket science. We know about that. It's just about getting them established. So what we did was we worked with the local council, with all of those agencies around the table, and we managed to get a bit of money together and set it up first in the middle of a shopping centre tried to make a quiet area where people could come in, but it was called a safe haven, so it didn't have big mental health clinic or
mhm,
anything around the front of it. Just a normal looking, it actually looks very much like a living room when you walk into somebody's house. And it's got a kitchen out the back with a fridge with it stocked with some food and lots of opportunity for people to make themselves a cuppa and sit quietly in areas. and they're met at the front door by a person with lived experience who doesn't say to them, "What's your mental health diagnosis?" or "What are you being treated for?" It says to them, "What's happening for you today? What can I help with?" And so the focus is on what's happening today. And then they sit quietly with one of the lived experience workers and talk through what it is they're needing and what can be done to help. So, of course, we would, on a political end, love to say to them, would you otherwise have gone to ED? So we've got stats to say we're keeping people out of emergency department, Mr. Government, please fund us.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't want to do that to people. That's not our approach. So we want to work with them about what their issue is today. But we're estimating somewhere between 30 and 40% of those people would have otherwise ended up in ED. So that's just our estimate. And we have people who have been sleeping in cars. We have people who are really, at the end of their tether. Quite a lot of suicidal ideation and discussion, which we never frame in that way, but it's about managing what's happening with that person today. They do rate on a scale how they feel when they come in, and how they feel when they leave. And so we know that a vast majority of people are feeling a great deal better. We try and then link people to what it is, the services that they need around them. And it might be that somebody needs to come and visit them, or it might be that they need to be referred to housing, or domestic violence services, or whatever it is. But it's just taking people off the street who feel like they need some sort of help and finding out how to shore up that support around them. Like we call it wraparound support because that's how it feels. How do we put that support around them? So that's what Safe Haven is about. It's run on very small amounts of money. We started running it. Now it's open all the time. We use it as well to run some classes for people on strengthening their resilience skills. With some of the agencies come in and provide some activities and so on, but we're not trying to run it as a day centre, as an alternative. We're trying to use it as a place where people come in where things are going really bad for them, and we help them find a way through that.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems to me it's very popular. It's a place that people are using in all sorts of ways, and yet we're having to fight really hard to get it funded.
Mm. It's like I always use this analogy that, when you are thirsty, you should not look for water. Its tap is there, and if you need
Yeah,
water, go and so this is
yeah,
this approach,
yeah,
and that actually helps a lot. Okay, so we are almost end of it, and the last question. So a lot of things happened, still long way to go, and what you are actually suggesting is that technology have that ability to scale up and point out and personalize the care to that particular person that time.
yeah.
That's a massive thing we have place to explore. So the last question is, beyond this financial constraint, education, resource ability, what you said, all I am hearing that we have to up our empathy level. We have to up our understanding of how the other person is thinking, and which is a big help in mental health intervention and treatment. So the last question is, With your age, with your life experience, please give us some tips on that, how as a whole humanity, as a community, we can go up that way.
Oh, I love this question. So I think as a community, we need to enhance our ability to listen deeply to people. Um, I talk a lot about walking in the shoes, but walking in the shoes requires that you actually listen. I think even when well, particularly when we're in the helping profession, what we want to do is give people answers all the time. So, you tell me your problem and I'll tell you how to solve it. Um, that we've done that for years and years and years.
Yeah,
Um,
within the community also, this is the only way. This is it. That's it. If you don't take it, it's your problem.
yeah, yeah, and
Anyway.
we do it with our families. We listen to our kids and say, this is what you should do. I think we've lost that ability to really listen deeply and to ask questions of people. So, what would you like to happen? What would the best outcome look like for you? Um, so really listening to what people want. And I think at the service level, we don't do that at all. So when I look at whether it's aging or mental health or services for domestic violence or whatever it is, it's often not the money. The money is often just going where that's governments think it needs to go. Um, and it's often not the amount of money, it's where we're putting it. And if we're listening deeply to people, um, so to take another group, say, a domestic violence survivor, what would help? What and not to expect that one thing will help everybody. Um, so it's like you good, and where would you go in your community to get help, or where would you want help to be provided to you, and what would it look like in what circumstances? Um, and it seems to me um, that IT um, and and the people operating that can follow that trail, can follow to where do we get in to help people? We all want help at the earliest opportunity, don't we?
Absolutely.
And the help might be just information, and so now everybody Googles everything. Um, but that's got no skill behind it. Like you could get 300 answers to one diagnosis. So it's, how can we match the skill needed at that particular time with the person who needs that skill? And that's somewhere behind the scenes. IT can do that. AI can do a lot of the background stuff quickly, very quickly, to produce stuff for people. Um, so I think deeply listening, and deeply listening, what it does is it brings up your empathy, doesn't it? It brings, once you walk in people's shoes, like when I used to stand in front of an audience with a person who had had severe psychotic episodes and where they talked about what was happening in their head, what those voices were saying to them when they had that psychotic episode. Instead of the fear that's generally in the community, the people in that room were crying. There were tears everywhere for that person and what they were experiencing. I think we need a lot more of that.
On that, as you know, if you want to live your life in your own terms, this is the right place for you. This is URL podcast. Thank you, Anne, for your time, for your wisdom, and hopefully down the line we will also talk some of the societal issues.
Thank Thank you so much for having me. It's been a delight talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Anne.